Hey guys, this is Blake here. For the most part, this video is going to be focusing on my least favorite movies of 2011. But before I get into that, let me just talk a little bit about Contraband, which I just saw a few days ago. It stars Mark Wahlberg, and I had very low expectations for it. This is dump month, and even though I have nothing against Mark Wahlberg, I don't think he picks the best projects, and I don't think he's a great actor either. I think, he's a passable actor maybe, at least when he has the right director. But for the most part, I'm relatively indifferent to him and his films. And this is, for the most part, no exception, but it was better than what I thought it would be. It's a pretty decent film. It has good suspense, some decent twists, some good acting. I do really like, I believe his name is Ben Foster, who plays his best friend. I think he's actually a very underrated actor, and I wish I'd see him in better movies more. But I feel that this is one of those movies that it could have been much worse with a lesser director, but it also could have been better. It has all the material for a good movie, which is actually very rare for a movie these days, but it just focuses on the wrong stuff. For example, the film kind of brings out the moral ambiguity of Mark Wahlberg's character. He gets involved in a situation where cops get killed. For the most part, throughout the movie, he's like the typical, I just have a family now, I don't want to get into that business anymore. But then there's one scene where his brother-in-law says, don't pretend like you're not enjoying this. And he's like, hell yeah, I am enjoying this, just don't tell your sister. And I think that could have been interesting if they played that up more. Maybe this isn't the nicest guy in the world, but he's not a bad guy either. Maybe if like Scorsese directed it, he would have probably made it much more like Goodfellas, with Ray Liotta's character, where you can't really call him a good guy, you can't really call him a bad guy. He's just a guy who has good and bad traits about him. So when another character turns out to be bad in this movie, you at times wonder if he's really that much worse than Mark Wahlberg's character. So a lot of that was lost in there, but at the same time, I do really have to admire the filmmakers for trying to be trying to make a pretty good movie. And I'd say definitely check it out as a rental. If you want to see it in theaters, go ahead. I think it's good enough to warrant that. But at the same time, if you weren't really all that interested, wait till DVD. So anyway, my least favorite movies of 2011. Now, I obviously didn't see everything, and a lot of people are probably going to be disagreeing with some of my choices. First off, I did not see Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1. I already explained why I didn't. The only chance I would have had to go and see it was just me alone, and I refused to do that. I'm sorry. I'm not going to go see Twilight on my own. Maybe when it comes out on DVD, I'll check it out on Netflix or something, but I'm sure it would have been up there if I had seen it. Another one that I don't know if it really counts, because it actually came out in 2010, but it was only released in the US in 2011, is the live-action Tekken movie. In itself, I think it's a subpar movie, but if you're a Tekken fan, which I am, you're going to hate the fuck out of it. It changes everything about Tekken. All the characters are completely different. The locations are completely different. Just the overall atmosphere is nothing like the games, and I was furious with it. And one of these days, I'm going to do a kick-ass of awesome, creepy bald guy hybrid type review where I go into that much more, because I'm mixed. I think the fight scenes are pretty good, but it's just everything else about it, it just pisses me off. I can't even talk about that too much, but I don't really count that since it technically is a 2010 movie. But the first one I'm going to list here is Paul. It stars Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. They're these two tourists from England and the US who come across an alien, and they have to escape government agents and go through all these different wacky hijinks. I expected to like this movie much more because, for one, the general consensus was that it was a pretty funny movie. But and I also like those guys. I thought Hot Fuzz was great, and I thought Shaun of the Dead was great. But this one, I don't know. At times it felt like it was too self-important. I really didn't think it was that funny, and I thought that it could never really establish a tone. It goes from really stupid, silly slapstick humor to like these deep, thought-provoking moments. And I just never felt they gelled very well together. I rarely laughed, and I thought some of its jokes came across as mean-spirited. Like, it really attacks blue-collar religion. I have no problem with that. I think there's humor that could be found there, but instead of being funny, it felt like the filmmakers were trying to make the statement, and it just made it seem really awkward and mean-spirited. And like I said, those don't really go real well with everything else. But beyond everything, I just didn't think it was very funny. But it has its moments, and I really don't think it belongs in this list. I think I expected so much more, and that's why I was a little more angry with it. Because really, a movie that is far worse than Paul is The Dilemma. That was Ron Howard's big return to comedy, and it stars Vince Vaughn and Kevin James. Vince Vaughn finds out that his best friend, played by Kevin James, his wife is having an affair. And it's even worse than Paul in that, but it has all the same problems. First off, I really don't like Vince Vaughn as a leading actor. I think he's good in a supporting role, like especially when it's a more serious type movie. Like, even though I hated his character in The Lost World, I thought he was really funny in it. But it seems like his style of humor just gets old when he is the main character. And on the other hand, I think Kevin James is a much more endearing leading actor, but it seems like he picks the worst projects too. So, problem one, I hated the characters. Everybody in this movie is just despicable. And what I hate about these characters is that it seems like the entire movie is them bitching about other people for being dishonest when they themselves are portrayed as being very dishonest. And everybody's like that. And I know this was intentional, but it made me hate everybody. I think one of the worst aspects of this movie is that it really damns Winona Ryder's character, who's the wife who's cheating, but then it's apparently okay when Kevin James's character does it. See, they never really flat out say that he's having an affair in the movie, but they strongly imply it, and he never denies it when he's accused of it. But for some reason, you're supposed to feel bad for him, but you're supposed to hate Winona Ryder. I think that's kind of odd, because usually in movies, it's the complete opposite. It's usually the guy who has the more shallow reasons for having the affair, and you always hate him. But if it's a woman having an affair, it's meant to be more emotional, so you're supposed to feel sorry for her. I think all that is bullshit. But in this film, I just could not stand that they try so hard to make us hate Winona Ryder, but we're supposed to feel sorry for Kevin James. And beyond that, once again, it is not funny. It is at times very uncomfortable when certain characters do something like very unlikable, like Kevin James has a real short temper, and he freaks out for stupid reasons. But for the most part, I never really laughed. It's really sad when the best thing about your movie is Channing Tatum. He's the guy who Winona Ryder is having the affair with, and he actually probably delivers his best performance, and he has some amusing moments. But think about that. When the best thing about your movie is Channing Tatum, you really fucked up somewhere. So that one really sucked. Far worse than Paul. Another movie I hated was Sucker Punch. Now, I really like Zack Snyder. I thought 300 was a visual masterpiece that I could watch at any time. Dawn of the Dead, it's alright. I think Zack Snyder did a very good job on it, but most of my problems was that I've seen and loved the original Dawn of the Dead, so it was just kind of a dumbed-down version of that. But once again, Zack Snyder did a great job on it. Watchmen, I still think is kind of uneven, but I think that the good points outweigh the bad points, but I can see you going the other way. All in all, I thought it was an interesting experiment, even if it was a failure, but I didn't really consider it that much of a failure, so take what you will there. With Sucker Punch, though, it feels like he's completely out of control. The plot just doesn't fit well with the visuals. It's one of those few movies where it seems like all the action does not fit with the plot, and I thought that's incredibly weird. 80% of the more wilder standout sequences don't feel relevant, and you don't want to think about that when you're watching an action film like that. I mean, most action films, even bad action films, most of the action feels relevant somehow. I, for example, just watched Project A2 with Jackie Chan. That movie's a complete mess in terms of storyline, but it's all about the action, and the action fits in the story, as messy as it is. But with Sucker Punch, nothing just seems to come together very well. I found the visuals to be overbearing and annoying, just really convoluted. I heard that they apparently completely butchered it before it was released, but I haven't seen the director's cut, but I can't imagine it being that much better. So it was just an all-around annoying, self-indulgent film that just collapses on its own weight. But I'll forgive Zack Snyder for that, because I believe every filmmaker has to have one movie that just completely sucks for the reasons that you would not expect them to suck for. So in this case, Zack Snyder, a visual director, his style just did not work here, and I'll forgive him for that as long as he doesn't make the same mistake anytime soon again. Then the last one I have is, well, I didn't see Twilight, but I did see Red Riding Hood. Fuck that movie. In some ways, it's actually worse than Twilight because it wants to have the same kind of love story, but it somehow comes across as even more shallow, even more vague. The actors are much more generic. I mean, say what you will about Taylor Lautner and Robert Pattinson. I do think that they have talent, and at least some charisma maybe, but not these guys. The guys who play these roles are just completely forgettable and bland and generic. There are some really self-indulgent moments here too in terms of its visual style or the themes it wants to convey. And probably the worst aspect of it, though, is the mystery. Wow. I mean, the mystery is so freaking obvious. Here's the rule in any of these types of movies. The character who the film doesn't throw suspicion on is going to be the bad guy. And they even show the character who turns out to be the killer do something incredibly suspicious, but none of the characters notice, so it makes it even more obvious because they're really like over-stressing, other suspects, but we know that they aren't going to be the killer because we already saw this guy do something incredibly suspicious. And the film focuses so much on that. And it's a shame, too, because it actually does have elements I liked. The CGI is pretty obvious, but it fit with, I think, that fairy tale atmosphere they were trying to convey. And Gary Oldman is incredibly entertaining in it. I mean, it's not a good performance, but he's fun. And I like what they do with that character. I mean, I think they should have focused more on him more than anything. But instead it just comes across like as a Twilight clone that's even worse in many ways, but at least it has more action, so I don't really want to say it is overall a worse movie. It has everything I dislike about Twilight. And granted, I don't really like anything about Twilight, but in many ways it does worse things than Twilight did. Like, once again, I felt the acting was much worse by the main leads. The girl's okay, I guess, but the guys, no. There's not really an order here. If I were to say if there was a worse of any of these films, The Dilemma probably is the one I hated the most, and the best of these films is probably Paul, but they all sucked, and I hated them. So next time you should get my top 12 favorite movies of 2011, and I'll see you guys then.